Okay, so now the last video on the tracts, and then we're going to finally go up and go into the medulla, the pons, and up through the brainstem, etc. These have been really frustrating videos, but as long as we get the tracts down packed, everything else is going to make sense, so just bear with me here. Now for this video, I'm not going to go like individual videos for Rubriospinal tract, Vestibulospinal tract, retro and medullary spinal tract. I'm just going to do it all in one. Why? Well, we spoke about the descending tracts, right? What was important about them? Well, the descending tracts were for motor supply, right? Motor supply to the body. And we said we branched off into two different regions. We branched into the corticospinal tract, and then we branched off into subcortical tracts. Well, the first video we made was on the cortical spinal tract and how it branched off into this lateral cortico and the anterior corticospinal tracts. And this has what? This was conscious supply. So I'm like, voluntary movement. I want to flex my arm. I know I'm flexing my arm. It's voluntary. It's conscious. Then we made a video on the subcortical tracts, right? I spoke about the first one, the cortical bulbar tract. Why did I do him separately? Well, he had a lot of stuff in him. Like there was a lot of different things going on, and I didn't want to combine it because I didn't want it to get really confusing. Now, this last video is going to be on these four. 1, 2, 3, 4. Alright, so it should not be too bad. Like we should really be able to understand it well. And how I'm going to start, I'm going to go in like a certain sequence. I'm going to start off with the vestibulospinal tract, and then I'm going to go into the Ponto reticular, then I'm going to go into the rubrospinal, and then the medullary. Why I wrote it like this, I don't know. I should have wrote it in order, but just know we're going to start off here at the vestibulospinal tract. Okay, for the vestibulospinal tract, this is the only one that we need to know that branches into two different regions, thankfully. Okay, what does he branch into? He branches into a medial vestibulospinal tract, and he's going to branch into a lateral vestibulospinal tract. Fine. What does this even mean? Okay, so the medial vestibulospinal tract, right? He's just going to supply functions for the head and the trunk. So like up here, the head and the neck mainly, the head region and the neck. Why? We'll get to it when I discuss like the flow of it, but just a good thing to know, the medial vestibulospinal tract is for the head and the neck. And now the lateral vestibulospinal tract, he's going to be for the limb and the trunks, or the trunk and the limbs, right? Okay, so similar, we spoke about different tracts with the what? The cortical spinal tract, we had it descending down into two different regions. And we also talked about the cortical bulbar tract descending down into different regions. And then we said the anterior was mainly for the axial, and the lateral was mainly for the appendicular. Almost the same, except this is just the head and neck now, and this is the limb and trunks. But we're going to get to it, don't worry. Okay, so we're going to do it in groups now. I'm going to group the first two together and the second two together. Why? I'm going to get to it. It makes sense why I grouped them together. So I'm going to group together the vestibulospinal tract and the Ponto reticulospinal tract. Reason being is that these two tracts work with extension of our limbs and stuff, or extension of our muscles, right? So these are extensors. These are for the extensors. What is extension? Going like this. What is flexion? Going like this. Okay, so these two tracts are supplying extension. Now, one other thing about the vestibulospinal tract, he's also going to supply posture, which would make sense. Like that's a type of extension, right? If you're standing straight up, you're going to have good posture. Your muscles are extended. If you flex them, it's not going to really be good posture, walking hunchback. No. Okay, so just know these two tracts are for extensors. The next two tracts that I'm going to talk about, the rubrospinal tract and the medullary reticulospinal tract, which you probably can't see on the video, but those are going to be for flexors of the body. Now, I said I'm going to start over here, right? I'm going to just go left to right, left to right. Okay, so the vestibulospinal tract, he's for posture and extensors. Now, what does he even do? So, these descending tracts, we said they're motor tracts. If there's a motor tract, it's where it's going to finish. It's going to finish into the anterior gray horn. Okay, so all of these pathways, where do they finish? They're going to finish in the anterior gray horn. Why do they finish there? Well, we said the anterior gray horn is for motor supply. Remember the ventral or the dorsal or the posterior gray horn? Well, this was the sensory supply. But we're not doing sensory, we're doing motor. Good. So let's start. If you look up here, I have two different regions, right? I have the inner ear and the crista ampullaris. Okay, what does that even mean? Now, 1 second. Okay, focusing primarily here, we have the macula, right? And the crista ampullaris. The macula is in the inner ear. Okay, so the inner region of my ear, we have the macula. And then we have the crista ampullaris, which is in the semicircular ducts. Also the ear. What are these guys used for? Well, if you remember, we have a nerve called the vestibulocochlear nerve. This nerve, right, it's a complex. Well, it's not a complex, it's a nerve that's going to come down and it's going to target a complex. What complex is it going to target? He's going to target the Vestibulo Nuclear complex. Okay, so what is that? You see this two blue boxes I have? This region is in the medulla. The next video I'm going to have, we're going to talk about the medulla. But I just want to talk about the tracts quick. So, I have these two blue boxes and they represent something. What do they represent? Well, they're going to be the Vestibulo Nuclear complex, and there's going to be 4 regions in each of them. Okay, it's broken up into 4 subdivisions. We have a superior and inferior, a medial and lateral. I don't know why I wrote it like that. I messed up. Medial and lateral. Fine. So, these 2 regions receive information, right, or give information to the vestibulocochlear nerve. This nerve then stimulates these 2 left and right side of our body, vestibular nuclear complex. Okay, the main things it innervates is the lateral and the medial side. Why? Well, remember I just said we have a medial vestibular nerve and we have a lateral vestibular nerve, or the tract. Medial vestibular tract and lateral vestibular tract. Here it is. Okay, so it's going to stimulate the lateral and medial side, left or right side of the body, and it's going to travel down. Okay, what's it going to travel down to? It's going to travel down into the cross-sectional view of the spinal cord, which we've been talking about the past 5 videos. Now, before I talk about why it's descending down into that, I want to just mention, we said the medial, right, is for the head and the neck. So that means this side right here, medial, on both sides, is going to supply where? The head and the neck. Okay, and the lateral side, right, it's still coming down. The lateral side is going to supply something else. He's going to supply what? The trunk and the limbs. And what is he supplying? Motor information. Okay, so good. We got it. We come down, macula inner ear, or crista ampullaris, through the vestibulocochlear nerve. Innervates into the vestibular nuclear complex. Fine. Travels down, right? Medial or lateral. What is it going to travel down to? Well, it's going to travel down eventually into the cross-section of the spinal cord. Now, before I talk about that, there's one more place it gets information from. It gets information from here, place 1, place 2, and now place 3, which I've been talking about in every video, is the cerebellum. Why? Well, the cerebellum, right, I have him on the sides just because I can't really draw in 3D. He's really located behind all these regions. But what does he do? He sends fibers, right? He sends fibers, known as the Vestigial Nucleus, right? And this tells the tract orientation of our body. Like, it helps with proprioception. It helps with fine motor, not fine, but it helps with muscle movements. Fine. I'm going to have another video on the cerebellum. But just know, these 3 different fibers all innervate what? I shouldn't say that. This complex. What's this complex called? Well, the fibers that are running through the Vestibulospinal tract. Now, we know the Vestibulospinal tract travels down through the cross-section of the spinal cord. Fine. He flows through the cross-section of the spinal cord into what? Well, he's going to the lateral sides. Okay, so what is that called? The lateral white column. Okay, we know that. We spoke about that a lot. He goes to the lateral white column. And now, what is he going to do? He's got to target something. Well, he's going to target the anterior gray horn. Why the anterior gray horn? Well, the anterior gray horn does what? Motor supply. How does he do motor supply? He stimulates an alpha and a gamma motor neuron, which we spoke about numerous times. The alpha is for what? Extrafusal fibers, telling the muscle to contract or to lengthen. Good. The gamma does what? It has nuclear bag and nuclear chain fibers. These are intrafusal fibers, and they just detect stretch and length and speed, right? Fine. Now, I just wrote medial up top and lateral on the bottom just for purposes of the video, but they're really together. So the medial one, the medial vestibular tract, right, comes down, lateral white column, targets the anterior great horn. What is he going to target now? Well, he's going to target the head and the neck region. Not too bad. Travels down both sides, left and right. This is all ipsilateral. This whole pathway is ipsilateral, thankfully. Now, if we do the lateral side, right? They're gonna be together. I just, separately. If we do the lateral side, the lateral is gonna target what? The alpha and the gamma motor neurons in the anterior great horn. And this lateral vestibulospinal tract is gonna do what? He's gonna tell muscles to contract and extend with which? Limb in the trunks. I kept saying contract and I was doing this. I shouldn't have. I should have just said extend because this vestibulospinal tract is only for extension. Remember that. So these fibers come down, right? Stimulated to the lateral side. Say we're talking about medial. The medial vestibulospinal tract targets the anterior great horn, hits the alpha and the gamma neurons. What do? We extend. Extension. Okay? Same thing for the lateral side. The lateral vestibulospinal tract travels down through the lateral white columns, hits the anterior great horn. Alpha and gamma motor neurons help with extension. Boom. We got this guy. Now the next tract I'm going to talk about is going to be the Ponto reticulospinal tract. Same thing. But before I talk about the same thing, we need to know one thing. If we're constantly extending, right, and we're constantly in a posture-like position, we're going to develop something called extensor hypertonia. So our muscles are constantly toned, right? Pretty dangerous. We have something that inhibits this, thankfully. This is called the red nucleus. The red nucleus, right, he's located right near the vestibular nuclear complex. Where is this in? The medulla. All this guy does is sends fibers to this complex and he's like, yo, relax, dude. You don't need to keep extending all day, okay? Relax. Calm down. So all he does is comes up here and he starts just tell him to relax. If these guys relax, we're not going to be constantly extended. We're not going to be hypertonia, right? It's going to be normal. We're not going to develop this disorder. So it inhibits the extensors. That's what the red nucleus is going to do. Where is it going to do it? Up in this region. Where is it going to go? Down to both cross-sectional views of the spinal cord. Now, this is really not too bad. We'll be fine. Like the next couple ones are even easier. So what did I say? We're going to do these together, right? What is this one going to be? This is the Ponto Reticulo. That's not how you spell it. Reticulospinal tract. Fine. And what is he going to use? Well, if he's doing the same thing as the vestibulospinal tract, he's going to target extensors. Fine. Now, think of the name. Ponto and then reticulo, right? Okay, what does this mean? Well, it's going to be in the reticular formation, right? So the reticular formation runs through all the different regions of the brainstem, the pons, the medulla, etc. We're going to get to that, but we're doing the tracks first. Okay, so it's going to run through the ponto and reticular formation. What is ponto? What do you think this is? Well, it's going to be the pons. Okay, it's going to be the name for the pons. Now, we're going to get information, right? We're going to get fibers coming from where? These fibers are going to come from the ascending tracts. Remember we talked about the ascending tracts. There was a couple types. We had the dorsal medial lemniscus pathway with the fasciculus cutaneous and fasciculus gracilis. We also had the spinothalamic tract and the spinocerebellar tracts. Yeah, so these tracts ascend up to the brain, right? Now, what happens? Before they go all the way up, they give off some fibers, right? They give off some signals. What are these signals going to do? Okay, well, these signals can go to the reticular formation, right? And we're going to stimulate this pons, right? The pons area. Now, when we stimulate this area, we have something called ponto-reticulospinal fibers. These fibers come off of the pons, right? And they're going to travel down through the spinal cord. Why? Okay, ascending fiber says sensory information, right? He's like, yo, we need to extend the arms somehow. We need to extend the legs. For whatever reason it is, why not flex? Well, flex is going to be on the next two pathways. This is for specifically extending. Okay, so we're like, all right, the ascending fibers is like, yo, you need to extend something. So I'm like, I guess I have to extend something. The ponto-reticulospinal fibers are like, I got you. He comes down. What does he do? Well, instead of passing through the lateral white columns, He's just going to pass through the the ventral white columns. Now, he passes through the ventral white columns. All he does, synapses onto the anterior gray horn, innervates what? The alpha and gamma motor neurons. Perfect. Travels down, does the same thing, alpha and gamma motor neurons. He does it all the way down. Why is this important? Well, because we need to extend the body. And where are we getting this extension innervation from? The ascending tracts. Where are we getting the extension innervation or the extension control from in the vestibulospinal tracts? Mainly from the ears, right? Okay. Still conscious control, but just a little bit different this time. Now, we know these two tracts pretty well. The next two tracts I'm going to talk about are going to be for flexors. Let's get to it. Okay, so now the last part, right? The last two tracts, thankfully, right? We're going to do the rubrospinal tract and the medullary reticulospinal tract. These are grouped together. Okay, why? Well, I told you I grouped the first two guys together, the vestibulospinal tract and the ponto reticulospinal tract. What were those used for? Okay, those are used for extension. These two guys are mainly used for flexion. Good. Now, the rubrospinal tract I'm going to do first. He's for flexors, right? He's mainly of the upper limb. A little bit of the lower limb, but mainly of the upper limb. I'm going to talk about why. And he's coming from where? The cortex. Okay, didn't I say the corticospinal tract used the cortex? Yes. What else uses the cortex? Well, the cerebrospinal tract and the medullary reticulospinal tract are going to get nerves or fibers running from the cortex. Fine. When we come from the cortex, right, we're going to come down and we're going to stimulate something called at the midbrain called the red nucleus. Didn't we just say what the red nucleus was? Yeah, he was something used for inhibition of extension, right? He told the extensor muscles to stop firing. So if he tells the extensor muscles to stop firing, what's the reverse of that? Tell the flexor muscles start firing. Okay, so at the red nucleus, right, he's the control center for this tract, kind of. He tells the vestibulospinal tract to stop, but he tells the rubrospinal tract to start. Okay, fine. Now, we travel down, right? When they go through the midbrain, or in the midbrain at the red nucleus, there's one more thing they get innervation from. So he says it's from the cortex, but it's also from something called the cerebellum. We spoke about this one multiple times. He's like, yo, I'm helping you out, dude. You need some help. He sends up some information into the red nucleus, helps with proprioception, muscle space, right? Knowing where you are. He's like, all right, you're good to go. Go. The red nucleus, right? The fibers cross over now, so it's a contralateral. They're going to crisscross. At the ventral tegmental desiccation. I'm going to talk about him in way more detail in a little bit, but for now, just remember this is the region where it happens. Okay, crosses over, travels down through what? The cross-sectional view of the spinal cord that we've been looking at for the past, 10 hours. Passes into the right, or not the right, yeah, the right and the left, known as what? The lateral ventral white column. Fine. Passes through the lateral white column, I'm sorry, not ventral, the lateral white columns, and it's going to go into the anterior gray horns. Perfect. Now, when it goes to the anterior gray horns, what does it do? Targets an alpha and a gamma motor neuron. What is alpha used for? The movement, extrafusal fibers. What is gamma used for? Stretch, right? Knowing the tone and stuff, and he's the intrafusal fibers, specifically nuclear bag and nuclear chain. Fine. Why do I got two of these guys drawn? Well, I said it's mainly the upper limb, right? So I wrote this section as a C for cervical, and this section down here is for thoracic. If we remember, we have the brachial plexus, right? He's what, C5 down to what? About the T1. Okay, no, yeah, about the T1. That's going to be the upper arm. But what else do we have? If we travel down T2, T3, we're going to do a little more of lower limb and stuff like that. But the main supply is the flexors of the upper limb. Fine. Now, last tract, home stretch, baby. The medullary reticulospinal tract works hand in hand with the rubrospinal tract. How? He's going to get innervation, right? He's going to get it from the cortex, like we've been speaking about. But now, instead of targeting the red nuclei, we're going to target the medullary reticular formation. Okay, so these fibers are going to travel down into the medullary reticular formation and do what? Well, they're going to try to pass down to the spinal cord. Now, they don't get all their supply from the cortex. They get some supply from ascending fibers. Where else did we see ascending fibers? in the Ponto Reticulospinal Tract. Remember that guy? He helped with the what? Vestibulospinal tract. Now, this Medullary Reticulospinal Tract, right? He's helping with the Rubrospinal Tract. But he's also receiving ascending fibers. From where? Remember the three tracts we talked about. The spinal thalamic, the spinal cerebellar. And what was the last one? Or the first one, the first video I made was the dorsal column of the medial lemniscate pathway. Which is what? These are all white matter. And what are these all for? Sensory information. What is sensory? Ascending fibers. So all the ascending fibers come from these tracts. Some of them, right, instead of going straight all the way up to the higher regions of the brain, we have like collateral support, right? It helps each other out. He gives supply to where? The reticular formation and the medullary reticular formation. Now, the fibers from the cortex and the ascending fibers like kind of join together around this medullary reticular formation, and they travel down and they are sent through what? Cross-sectional view of the brainstem. Now, they go to the lateral white columns, just like the rubrospinal tract, the lateral white columns. And where do they go? They target the anterior gray horns. You guys got to answer this question. You know where it comes from. The anterior gray horns does what? Motor supply. How? Alpha motor neurons do what? The actual movement. Extrafusal fibers. Alpha motor neurons. Good. The gamma does what? Stretch, length, right? Determines like the tension. What is that? Intrafusal fibers. Specifically, nuclear bag and nuclear chain. Now, we're done. We're done with the tracks, finally. So, the next coming videos, what are we going to do? Well, we started off with the spinal cord, right? Right over here. Now we're going to ascend up. We're going to ascend up into the medulla. After the medulla, we're going to ascend up into the pons. And then we're going to just keep ascending up further and further and further. Why is this so important? Well, if we understand all the different tracks, right, and where everything goes, we can understand what the different regions in the medulla, the pons, etc., what those functions are. So if we just give like a little example, right? We just put like, say, trigeminal nerve, right? And we're like, oh, trigeminal nerve passes through somewhere. How are these fibers like targeted? Well, we already know the tracks. Now all we have to do is match the function to the track it goes to. Not going to be too bad. Just bear with me through it. And if you have any questions, just let me know, but I hope it helped. Alright, so if you stayed for the whole entire subcortical tracts video, these questions are at the end of it. If you didn't, I'm just doing a separate video on the subcortical tract questions, just so you guys, I don't know, if you don't want to watch all the videos on it, just, you could bear with me with the questions, and I'm going to go through it pretty in-depthly. If not, I'll post a link at the end of this video, or I'll post it right now up in the top right, and you could just go directly to the tracks videos if you don't understand it. It explains things in a little more detail. But if not, here we go. What is the function of the red nuclei? Okay, so what should we know before we even get into this stuff? Okay, so what should we know? Here we go. There's 4 different tracks that we need to know for this subcortical. There's 5, really. What's the 5th one called? The corticobulbar tract. But the video, we're just going to talk about the sub 4 divisions of where? The descending tracts of the subcortical tracts. Here we go. Now, they're the vestibulospinal tract, ponto reticulospinal tract, rubrospinal tract, and medullary reticulospinal tract. Now, what does the question ask us? What is the function of the red nuclei? Well, we didn't know what tract there has red nuclei in it. Well, if we remember in the first lectures, or in that video, red nuclei occurs in 2 different tracts. Okay? It was in the vestibulospinal tract and in the rubrospinal tract. Now, important thing to know. These 2 tracts right here are for extension. Okay, sorry. I can't write there. Extension of the muscles. These 2 tracts are for what? Well, if those are for extension, these are for flexors. And you see I have a line going right down Broadway over here, separating them, right? But they're 2 different tracts, but they work hand in hand. These 2 are 2 different tracts that kind of work hand in hand. All 4 of these tracts, fortunately, kind of work hand in hand together as well. So how? The question asks for what is the function, right, of the red nuclei. Well, here's the red nuclei, right? It's on both sides. Now, it could either do something for extension or it could do something for flexion. Now, we said these 2 tracts were for extension. How? Okay, so these tracts, we're going to do the vestibulospinal one first. The vestibulospinal tract has
two things on either side, right? This is the Vestibulonuclear complex. I'm just going to abbreviate. If you want to watch it, you can have the other video. Vestibulonuclear complex, right? This gets fibers from the vestibulocochlear nerve, and it sends it down through the body, right? When it sends it down through one of these horns, what does it do? Well, it goes to the lateral white columns, and when it goes to the lateral white columns, targets the anterior gray horn. When it targets the anterior gray horn, what happens? Stimulates alpha and gamma motor neurons. We said this was for the muscles. Now, for the alpha motor neurons, this is for the movement. The gamma is for the stretch. If we are in the vestibulospinal tract, what do you think these alpha motor neurons are going to be used for? They're going to be used for extension, so they're going to extend. Now, if we have constant extension, right, we're going to develop something called hypertonia. How do we stop constant extension? Well, in the vestibulospinal tract, right, we have the red nucleus, and the red nuclei, right, they target the vestibulonuclear complex. What do? They inhibit this complex. If they inhibit this complex, they're going to say, yo, stop, sorry, bad color. They're going to say, yo, stop extending so much. So they're going to inhibit extension. Now, if we go to the cerebrospinal tract, right? I said we have red nuclei here. Are they going to inhibit extension? Well, yeah, because that's what they do. So they're going to inhibit extension in this pathway. But what is this pathway used for? This pathway is used for flexion. How does it occur? Real quick. We have the cortex, right? The fibers come down. They come. Where do they travel into? They travel into this red nucleus. After they pass the red nucleus, they cross over contralaterally. When they cross over contralaterally, they descend down. When they descend down, where are they going to go? They're going to go into the lateral white columns. They're going to target the anterior gray horn, and then they're going to stimulate alpha and gamma neurons. Well, alpha we said is movement, gamma is for stretch. What do you think the alpha motor neurons are going to do? Well, they're going to do flexion. Why? Because we're in this cerebrospinal tract, which does flexors. Fine. Now, if we go back to our question, we know it's talking about the two red nuclei. So it's either vestibulospinal or cerebrospinal. This one is for inhibiting extension. This one's inhibiting extension. But what's the positive effect of the red nuclei? The positive effect is going to stimulate flexion. It's going to flex the muscles. So here's the question. What is the function of the red nuclei? Does it cause contraction of flexor muscles? Yes, it does. Does it cause contraction of extensor muscles? No, it does not. Does it inhibit flexor contraction? No, it stimulates it. Does it inhibit extensor contraction? Yes, it does. So what is the answer here? A and D. I know there's just two choices, but what are you going to do? I took these questions from Ninja Nerd, and his questions are great. However, he has them like in different groups, so like he'll have certain questions just for the vestibulospinal tract, just for this tract, just for this tract, and just for this tract. I combined them all, so we're going to have two different answers, but we have to know the red nuclei does these two things. Okay, let's continue down. Which of the following is true concerning the Pontine reticulospinal tract? Well, if you remember what he was, if you don't, it's fine. Let's do him real quick. Where does he come from? He comes from, let me draw him in orange, reticular formation, right? We have the reticular formation, and what comes off of the reticular formation? Pons. What do these pons do? Well, these pons, they get fibers from the ascending tract, so the ascending tract gives them fibers. These fibers travel down. I should not have drawn it like that. They travel down ipsilaterally, and where do they go? Well, they go into our cross-sectional view of the spinal cord, like we talked about. They just travel through ventrally, however. They go to the ventral white column. When they go through the ventral white column, target the anterior gray horn, stimulate alpha and gamma motor neurons. What do these neurons do? This is motor. This is detect stretch. What is the motor for the Pontine reticular tract? What do we think? Well, it's got to be extension because we said this tract does extension. Okay, so the Pontine reticular spinal tract does extension. Now, let's look at our choices. Which of the following is true concerning the Pontine reticulospinal tract? The pathway starts from the red nuclei. No, it does not. Where does it start from? We said ascending fibers, right? It receives the information from the ascending fibers, and it targets what? The Pontine nuclei. Okay. Does it start from an ascending track? Yeah, it does. Does it stimulate extensor muscles? Yes, it does. What else? Does it help in flexion of the hands? No, it does not. So, the fibers come from the ascending tract, and it also helps with what? Extension. So what's our answer choices? B and C. This is correct. Now, actually, I read the choice wrong. I'm sorry. Is it an ascending tract? No, it is not an ascending tract. I was wrong. It is a descending tract. However, it gets its supply, right? It gets its stimulation from ascending tracts. I read that question way too fast. That's how I can mess up on a test. It receives the info from an ascending tract, but this Pontine reticulospinal tract is a descending tract. All of these tracts, we need to know Vestibulospinal, Ponto reticulo, Rubric, and Medullary. These are all descending tracts, so they're all sending motor supply. Okay, so that is wrong. Ascending, it is descending. What is our answer choice then? C, it stimulates the extensor muscles. Good. Now, regarding the gamma motor neurons, we just spoke about them. What do? Alpha does movement. Gamma does stretch, right? And tension. So, does it contract the extrafusal muscle fibers? No. Alpha does the extrafusal muscle fibers because it's the movement. So, that's wrong. Does it shorten the muscles? No, that's alpha. Does it lengthen the muscles? No, that's also alpha. Does it keep the muscle spindles taut? Yes, that's the tension. Coming from where? Intrafusal fibers. Okay, so D is our answer here. Now, regarding the pathway of Pontine reticulospinal tract, what is true? Okay, so remember what the Pontine reticulospinal tract was. Real quick, let's go to him. He does what? He gets it from the ascending fibers, goes to the reticular formation through the Pontine nuclei, down through the spinal cord to the anterior gray horn, alpha, gamma motor neurons, and it helps extend the muscles. So, does it supply gamma motor neurons, which will contract the extrafusal fibers? Okay, it does supply gamma motor neurons, right? Because it does alpha and gamma. Well, is it going to contract the extrafusal fibers? Probably not, right? We said it's extension, so we're going to put a question mark here. Does it do extension of the hands after desiccation? Well, I think so. We know it's extension. Does it receive impulses from the medulla? No, it receives impulses from where? The ascending fibers. So that's wrong. Or the nuclei are in the pons. Is that right? Well, that's probably right? That's where the nuclei start from, the pons, right? And they proceed down. Okay. What about the gamma motorons? Are they going to contract the extra muscle fibers? No. They're going to extend them. Extend of the hands after desiccation? Or decussation? No. Where does decussation occur? What is decussation? Well, decussation is a crossover. Do we have any crossovers in this tract? No. We have a crossover in the rubrospinal tract, but we don't have contralateral crossovers in the Ponto reticulospinal tract. So no, that is not correct. So that is wrong. Why is it doing that? So what's our answer? The nuclei are in the pons because it goes from the Pontine nuclei down into the cross-section of the spinal cord. Now, which of the following is true concerning the rubrospinal tract? Oh my God, we just spoke about him. We got to know this. Rubrospinal tract comes from where? The cortex. Cortex travels down into where? The red nuclei. They cross over, right? Decussation, where? The ventral tegmental region. Ventral tegmental desiccation. Travels down into the spinal cord, into the where? Lateral white columns, goes into the anterior gray horn, stimulates the alpha and gamma motor neurons, causes flexion. Okay. The pathway starts from the red nuclei. Does he? I thought he started from the cortex. But he also goes to the red nuclei. So we're just going to say maybe. Is it an ascending tract? No, it is a descending tract. We know this. It stimulates extensor muscles. No, it does not. What does it stimulate? Flexor muscles. It desiccates in the pons. Oof, this might be our answer. Why is this our answer? Where is desiccation occurring? Right over here in the ventral tegmental desiccation, which is where? In the pons. Now, if you guys look at the last video I posted, you would be able to know this one. I just went really quick here, so it's kind of hard to tell, but the answer is D. I'm going to have another video talking about the pons in more detail, so if you didn't know that one, it's okay. Okay, which of the following descending tracts is purely voluntary? Well, what is a voluntary tract? Well, we said the main voluntary tracts were from the corticospinal tract, right? This was our conscious control. What was the unconscious control? Well, that's the corticobulbar, the rubrospinal, the vestibulospinal, the ponto reticulospinal, and the medullary reticulospinal. So our answer's got to be corticospinal. Now, where does the rubrospinal tract originate from? We said this. What was the rubrospinal tract? He came from where? Came up through the cortex, right? Then he went through the red nuclei. After the red nuclei, he decussated, right? Then he went into our spinal cord. Went to the lateral columns, into the anterior gray horn, alpha and gamma. But he started from where? The cortex. Okay, so we know it's not the medulla, not the pons, not the midbrain. It's the subcortex. It's a branch of it, so that's fine. That's our answer. Which of the following tracts helps to facilitate our posture and balance? Oh, we said this whole entire thing. We know posture and balance comes from where? The extensions, right? The extension tracts. We have two extension tracts, vestibulospinal and ponto reticulospinal. Now, we said the vestibulospinal does one extra thing. He helps with the posture. So we have to know this is our vestibulospinal tract. I said this in the video in the beginning, so if you didn't remember, it's okay. Just go look at it again. Which two descending tracts act on flexor muscles? Okay, we just grouped it in 4, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to scroll up and look at it real quick. What do we say? Extensors, vestibulospinal and ponto reticulo. Flexors, rubrospinal and medullary reticulospinal. Okay. So we said rubrospinal and what? Medullary reticulospinal. So this is our answer. All right, guys. That's the conclusion of our tracks. I hope it helped, and I hope to see you in the next video, which is going to be on the medulla. Have a good one.